All right, let's get into it. Today we're diving into one of the most vital ecosystems on the planet, wetlands. But we're not just going to look at them as places. We're going to look at them as these incredibly powerful engines, driven completely by the rhythm and the force of water.
You've probably heard these phrases before, right? Nature's supermarkets, kidneys of the landscape. They're fantastic descriptions. They paint this picture of a place just teeming with life and doing all this essential filtering work for our planet. They're vivid, they're poetic, and you know what? They hint at something that's incredibly important. But okay, beyond all the cool metaphors, what actually makes a piece of land a wetland in the eyes of science? It's a question that's way more complex and honestly a lot more interesting than you might think. And it all boils down to one key ingredient.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the official definition, then get into these unique water patterns, their hydrologic signatures. Then we'll see how the water shapes life, how life actually shapes the water right back, and finally, why any of this matters.
All right, first up, let's break down the basic building blocks. The best way to think about a wetland is like a three-legged stool. It absolutely needs all three parts to even stand up.
Now, what's really fascinating about this diagram is seeing how these three things play together. You've got the life, what we call biota. You've got the physical and chemical environment, which includes those unique soils, and of course the hydrology, the water. But pay attention to the arrows here. They show that hydrology is the real driver. It's the architect that designs the other two.
And that right there is the key takeaway for our whole explainer today. More than the plants, more than the soil itself, it's the presence, the movement, and the rhythm of water. It's hydrology that actually creates and sustains a wetland. It's the master variable.
So if water is the key, how do we even describe what it's doing? Well, that brings us to this idea of a hydrologic signature. You can think of it like a unique fingerprint for every single wetland out there. The sciencey term for this signature is the Hydroperiod. Now, it's not just about whether a wetland is wet or dry. It captures the entire pattern, how long it's flooded, how often, how deep the water gets, and the very timing of it all through the seasons. And this unique pattern, it comes from something called a water budget. It's basically like a bank account for water, a balance of what comes in and what goes out. So looking at the diagram, inflows are stuff like precipitation, that's P, and surface water flowing in, SI. And the outflows, that's stuff like evapotranspiration, water going back into the atmosphere, ET, and water flowing out, SO. This constant balancing act is what creates that unique water level.
But here's the thing. That signature is not set in stone. Not at all. Just look at this data from the Big Cypress Swamp in Florida. In a wet year, the water level is pretty high and stable. But check out the dry year. It absolutely plunges. This dynamic, fluctuating nature is totally fundamental to how wetlands work.
Okay, so we know every wetland has its own unique water signature. But how does this constantly changing water level, this hydroperiod, actually create the special world of a wetland? Well, it kicks off a really powerful chain reaction. Let's go back to our systems diagram. The hydrology, that's box number 1, directly changes the physicochemical environment, box number 2. When water is constantly soaking the ground, it changes everything from the ground up, and most importantly, it changes the amount of oxygen available.
So this is the crucial point. When soil is totally waterlogged, the oxygen gets pushed out. It becomes what we call anoxic. And this one chemical shift is a total game changer. It determines which nutrients are available and creates this super stressful environment where most normal land plants just can't survive.
And this illustrates the next step perfectly. That unique, oxygen-poor environment we see in box 2, it acts like a filter. It determines exactly which species, the biota in box 3, are specialized enough to actually thrive there. These are your classic wetland plants, the ones that are totally adapted to having wet feet.
But now, here comes the twist. You might think the plants and animals are just passively dealing with whatever water conditions they're given, but it turns out they are active participants. They actually fight back and shape the water themselves. Take another look at the diagram, but this time zero in on those dotted feedback arrows, the ones labeled B. This is where the life in the wetland, the biota, reaches back and actually changes the physical environment and even the very hydrology that created it in the first place.
So how on earth does that happen? Well, for one, plants build up peat from their own dead organic matter, slowly raising the floor of the wetland. Their stems and roots act like a net, slowing down water and trapping sediment, which builds the land even higher. And get this, trees act like giant straws, pulling huge amounts of water out of the soil through transpiration. They can literally change local water levels over time. Life becomes the ecosystem engineer.
Okay, let's bring this all home. Why is it so incredibly important to understand a wetland's hydrology? Because, as we've seen, it basically dictates everything else. It all comes down to these 4 key principles.
First, hydrology decides who can even live there. Second, it drives productivity, how much life the wetland can support. Third, it controls whether organic stuff, like peat, builds up or just gets washed away. And finally, it runs the entire chemical engine of the wetland, the all-important cycling of nutrients. And this isn't just some abstract theory. This quote from our source material really nails the practical takeaway. If we want to protect or manage or even restore these incredible ecosystems, we have to get the water right first. You fix the hydrology and the rest of the system at least has a fighting chance to follow.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty critical question. In a world with a changing climate, with shifting rainfall patterns, and with all our intensive water management, what happens to these ecosystems when we rewrite their hydrologic signature? That is definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks for joining us.